Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a source stack that focuses on a threat that is so new, so profound, that law enforcement agencies, well, they're really struggling to classify it.
They don't really have a box for it. And it's absolutely critical to frame this one right from the start, because the sources we're looking at, and these are coming from federal agencies, from international journalists, they're describing something completely unprecedented.
So what are we looking at?
We are diving into the 764 network. It's an online group that's so destructive that the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI have designated it Tier 1 investigative matter.
Tier 1.
Yep.
For our listeners, that's the highest danger classification the FBI has.
It is.
That's usually reserved for, major national security threats, foreign intelligence, large-scale international terrorism.
Exactly. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they're calling it an ideological violent extremist network. So you have this global, decentralized, and this is the key part, youth-led operation.
Youth-led?
It specializes in sextortion, but it's what they do with that sextortion that elevates it. They use the money and the control to force their victims into these nihilistic acts of violence, self-harm, murder, all of it for online status.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really get past the headlines and understand the scope, the tactics, and the ideology, if you can even call it that, that's driving 764. The sources just paint this devastating picture of a network that kind of exploded onto the scene around 2021.
And its structure is built for destruction. It's built to evade capture.
What's so strange here, and what I think separates this from, say, ISIS or Al-Qaeda, is the motivation.
Well, some of the early reports tried to put it in a neat box. They called it a satanic neo-Nazi cult.
Right.
But when you actually dig into the investigations, you see that the traditional ideology, the politics, the religion, it's often secondary.
So what's actually driving them?
It's a deep-seated sadism, a profound misanthropy, a hatred of humanity, and these really aggressive group dynamics where the members are all competing for status, which just accelerates the radicalization into real actual violence.
So the fascism, the Satanism, that's just the window dressing. It's the vocabulary they use.
It's the aesthetic.
But the thing that makes it go is just pure sadism and a hunt for status. It's not about a political goal.
Not at all. It's about the feeling of control. It's about inflicting the maximum amount of pain, both psychological and physical, that you possibly can. The violence isn't strategic in any traditional sense. It's just driven by this need and the ruthless pursuit of status within their online world, which they call the calm.
And they'll adopt the symbols, the swastikas, the occult stuff.
But the primary motivation, the one that overrides everything else, is just raw power. The power you get from controlling, harming, and ultimately destroying another human being, often someone their own age.
It's hard not to think that we're seeing some of the worst impulses in human history, but now they're just supercharged by the internet and manifesting in teenagers.
That's a very dark, but I think very accurate way to put it.
So to understand this network, you really have to go back to its origins. The founder of 764, his alias was Felix. His real name was Bradley Chance Cadenhead. And the detail that just jumps out is his age.
He was 15.
15 years old when he started this global enterprise in 2021.
And Cadenhead's background, when you look at the court and police records from Texas, it's crucial. It speaks to the kind of profound isolation that these networks both prey on and amplify. He was a school dropout. He was deeply, deeply isolated, had a history of severe psychological breakdowns, and he was bullied constantly.
So in a way, he weaponized his own suffering.
He did. He poured all of that personal darkness into creating this organization.
And he named it 764. Which is it's the ZIP code of his hometown, Stephenville, Texas.
The banality of it.
It's chilling. This global terror threat literally started in a teenager's bedroom in rural America.
And the sources show that this darkness had started showing up years earlier. The records say Cadenhead was fascinated with graphic murder and torture content online when he was just 10 years old.
10.
And even more disturbing, he'd use school computers to draw these very detailed images of school shootings. It got to the point where authorities were alerted, and they actually investigated him for terrorist threats long before 764 even existed.
So you can see the trajectory. From this isolated, bullied kid to the self-proclaimed leader of a global sadism network, it just shows you how these online spaces can incubate the absolute worst impulses in vulnerable young people.
But he didn't just invent these methods out of thin air, did he?
No, not at all. He learned the specific techniques, the mechanics of sextortion, while he was active on a really toxic Discord server. It belonged to a precursor group called CVLT.
The CVLT network, that's a key detail. So this is built on taking pre-existing cybercriminal tactics and then just radically escalating them.
He refined what he learned on CVLT. And where did he find the people to join him? The core hubs are Discord and Telegram, but the recruitment, the initial grooming happens on gaming platforms.
Platforms like Roblox and Minecraft.
Exactly. Places that are just massively popular with children and teens.
And he met his original assistant, the person who helped him set up 764, on one of those gaming platforms.
Wow.
That's what's so insidious about this. It's this blending of the most extreme organized violence with the most innocent parts of being a kid online. It's hiding in plain sight.
Right. It uses games as its front door.
Okay, so we have to get into the ideological mess that fuels this. We said it's secondary, but it provides the justification, the rationale, and it's not one clean belief system.
No, it's a collage, a chaotic collage of just philosophical darkness.
It's a dark philosophical buffet, you could say.
Yeah.
The core framework is something called accelerationism and nihilistic violent extremism, or NVE.
So for listeners who aren't familiar, what is accelerationism?
It's the belief that our current society, the political systems, the economy, social norms, it's all so corrupt and broken that the only way forward is to actively speed up its collapse, to make things worse, to hasten the downfall through chaos and destruction.
That sounds perfectly designed to appeal to alienated kids who feel totally powerless.
That's the hook. That's the psychological appeal. It takes your personal alienation and it reframes it as a kind of perverse power. You're not a victim of society anymore. You're an agent of its necessary destruction.
And the nihilistic violent extremism part, the NVE, that's the how-to guide.
That's the means to the end. These NVE groups are motivated purely by a hatred for humanity, by misanthropy, and just a desire for chaos. They target vulnerable people, and their activities aren't just financial crimes. They share the most vile content imaginable, CSAM, gore videos, and they actively groom their victims to commit violence, either against themselves or against other people.
So destroying an individual becomes a stand-in for destroying society. But as you said, 764 spun out of CVLT, and that group was a bit more traditionally ideological.
It was. CVLT came first, and it offers a really crucial contrast. It was founded in 2019 by a man named Rohan Sandeeparan, a 23-year-old Indian national who was, and this is the ironic part, described in the sources as a brilliant economics student studying in France.
A brilliant economics student.
And he starts this Discord server, initially just to talk about fascism and Nazism.
Yeah.
He expressed this really intense, explicit hatred of Jews and Muslims.
That is just an astonishing profile. An intellectual using his intelligence to build an international neo-Nazi network from his dorm room in France.
And the sources say he used that intelligence to structure the organization. Europol actually defines CVLT's core principles as nihilism, pedophilia, and neo-Nazism. So while 764 really ran with the nihilism, CVLT was maybe more grounded in that old-school fascist ideology.
And what were the specific tactics that CVLT normalized that 764 then took and just dialed up to 11?
CVLT normalized what the sources call highly degrading and dehumanizing acts as a form of control. Reports from ICE documented victims being forced into these just revolting acts of subjugation.
Like what?
Things like drinking their own urine, eating their own hair, fan signing, which was the precursor to the extreme cut signing we'll get to, and forcing self-harm. Rain wasn't just a leader. He literally wrote the manual on this abuse. He authored a guide with the chilling title, How to Get a Girl.
Unbelievable.
And it just detailed his methods for finding, attracting, and ultimately torturing his prey. So when Cadenhead and 764 broke away, they took those methods and they intensified them. They expanded the demands to include forcing victims to commit animal cruelty, a clear escalation toward maximum transgression.
But 764 also brought in a distinct spiritual element, moving beyond just fascism and embracing this group called the Order of Nine Angles, or O9A.
O9A is a deeply secretive satanic network. It's a left-hand path group founded in Britain way back in the 70s. And it's this really unusual mix of occultism, Satanism, and neo-Nazism.
So what does O9A bring to the table for 764?
It provides the intellectual scaffolding for absolute amorality. Its teachings are all aimed at transcending normal morality, normal societal rules. It basically tells its followers that all moral restraints are just illusions and that true power lies in breaking every single one of them.
The sources mention something called the O9A's doctrine of transgression. That sounds less like dark philosophy and more like a direct justification for crime.
It absolutely is. The doctrine advocates for practicing insight roles. This means members are encouraged to go undercover, essentially, inside other politically extreme groups, neo-Nazis, anarchists, even certain Islamist groups.
Not because they believe in those specific politics, though.
Not necessarily. It's to gain real-world experience in chaos and, crucially, to encourage the breaking of societal taboos. They believe that committing crimes, committing violence, it all advances what they call ionic evolution. Basically, transforming human consciousness through total chaos.
So it gives these isolated young guys a way to feel like they're soldiers in some huge, dark spiritual war just by committing crimes online.
That is the perverse genius of it. And yes, the source material does explicitly mention O9A's texts about sacrifice. They openly encourage human sacrifice. They call the victims offers. And they state that real power comes from harming others without any hesitation or guilt.
But there's a strange contradiction there, isn't there? The O9A texts themselves specifically say that children must never be victims of sacrifice.
And that paradox is so telling. O9A is esoteric. It sees transgression as this philosophical tool. But 764 took the parts it liked, the immorality, the nihilism, the violence, and they just stripped away those self-imposed ethical boundaries. They weaponized it against the most vulnerable population imaginable. Children.
So they took the worst parts of this historical extremism and grafted it onto modern digital sadism.
Precisely. The goal of causing chaos remained, but the target shifted from some esoteric societal critique to just the brutal, raw destruction of individual kids.
And the chaos just kept splintering. We saw another offshoot rise up, the No Lives Matter, or NLM group.
NLM is another pure expression of this nihilistic accelerationist terror. Their whole ideology is just radical nihilism, anti-humanism. They promote murder, mass murder, self-harm, animal abuse, with the explicit goal of abolishing all of society's standards. The name itself is designed to be as offensive and misanthropic as possible.
But this group, as horrible as it is, actually drew a line in the sand with 764 in early 2024.
Yes, which is fascinating in a very dark way. The sources say that the alliance between NLM and 764 fell apart specifically because of 764's deep connections to Satanism and, crucially, to pedophilia.
So even these extreme nihilists had a limit.
It seems so. NLM consciously distanced itself to sharpen its focus purely on non-pedophilic misanthropy and murder. And that split tells you just how depraved and how fundamentally centered on child exploitation the core of 764 really is.
Okay, let's shift from the dark philosophy to the methodical process, the architecture of abuse. How do they actually translate this ideology into destroying individual lives?
The first step is targeting.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly predatory. They're specifically hunting for minors aged 9 to 17.
9 years old.
But the sources emphasize they have a clear preference for children from marginalized backgrounds, ethnic minorities, or, and this is the most common, kids who are already struggling with severe mental health issues, depression, anxiety, kids who have expressed suicidal thoughts. They're looking for lost souls.
And they know exactly where to find them, not just on big social media sites, but in those gaming and mental health forums.
The grooming process is just. It's weaponized empathy. It's utterly cynical. Members will infiltrate a Minecraft server or a mental health forum on Reddit, and they'll pose as a supportive friend, a confidant, maybe even a romantic interest.
They pretend to offer exactly what these vulnerable kids are desperate for.
Genuine affection, mental health support.
Yeah.
And once that trust is established, once the child is isolated from their family and friends, then the exploitation begins.
Which brings us to the sextortion mechanism. That's the engine of control.
Yeah.
How does that usually work?
Well, they get the initial material, usually nude images, either through hacking, social engineering, or just by faking a romantic interest. The moment they have that compromising data, it becomes blackmail material, but they don't stop there. They immediately compile everything into what they call, with this chilling slang term, the lore book.
A lore book. That sounds like something out of a video game, but it's a manual for psychological destruction.
It's exactly that. The lore book is a meticulously organized collection of all the extortion material. The CSAM, the self-harm photos they force the victim to take, the chat logs, all their personal data, and they use this comprehensive, devastating file to threaten to expose the victim to their family, their friends, their school. It ensures absolute terrorized control.
And this is all standardized?
Completely. The sources reveal the truly shocking detail that these groups circulate an internal manual over 240 pages long, detailing exactly how to groom and sextort children from start to finish.
A 240-page technical manual for depravity. That's not just a few bad actors, that's an institution of organized sadism.
But the coercion doesn't stop with just pictures and threats. It demands these extreme physical acts of subjugation.
And this is where the status economy of 764 really comes into play.
It is. The more horrifying the act the victim is forced to perform, the higher the status of the tormentor inside the comm. These acts are all about proving your control, and they're shared across their private chats, like trophies.
Let's get into the specifics of those acts, particularly this grotesque practice they call cut signing.
This is maybe the most explicit demonstration of ownership you can imagine. Children are forced to carve or cut sign the tormentor's online nickname or other symbols, in some documented cases, Nazi swastikas, deeply into their own skin.
It's a literal branding.
It is. It's an act of self-mutilation that permanently marks them as property of the group. And according to the sources, the depth and the graphic nature of the cut is directly proportional to the abuser's status in the network. They do it live on camera or record it, and then circulate it as proof of their power.
And from there, the demands just spiral into just unbelievable extremes. It's pure transgression for its own sake.
The list of demands from the source material, it reads like a descent into absolute moral chaos. They force victims to torture and kill family pets. They coerce them into acts of incest, rape, or bestiality, all of it filmed. They demand dangerous acts of self-harm, like drinking bleach, flushing their own heads in toilets, or strangling themselves.
There's no goal other than creating trauma.
The only purpose is maximum transgression, maximum psychological damage, and creating undeniable proof that the victim is utterly powerless.
And beyond the psychological terror, they also use traditional cybercrime and, chillingly, real-world violence to keep people in line.
They use well-known tactics like swatting, making fake emergency calls to send a SWAT team to a victim's house, and doxing, publishing the private information of the victim and their family. But the most significant escalation, the thing that really pushes this into the realm of modern terrorism, is a tactic they call bricking.
Bricking, the commodification of real-world violence.
Exactly. It's a violent physical intimidation tactic. They'll throw a brick through a window or sometimes even shoot up a house. And this is often outsourced. It's hired out to other people in this broader cybercrime community for a tiny fee.
How small a fee?
Sometimes as little as $50 to $200.
For an act of real-world terrorism.
And the sources show that this is sometimes used as an internal loyalty test. If a junior member gets bricked, do they call the police and expose the network? Or do they stay silent and prove their devotion? That ability to translate digital sadism into cheap, lethal, real-world violence is what ultimately got them the terrorism designation.
So let's talk about the human cost of all of this. The scope of this crisis is just staggering. The FBI estimates that thousands of children have been victimized by 764 and its affiliates.
Thousands. And as of May 2025, the FBI had about 250 active investigations related to this network. That's across all 55 FBI field offices in the U.S.
250 active investigations. This isn't a niche problem. This is a nationwide crisis that's crossing every border and affecting every kind of community.
It is an invisible war being waged on our most vulnerable.
To really understand the depth of this nihilistic violence, we have to look at some of the documented incidents. Let's start with the horrific case of the live-streamed suicide in 2021.
This case just encapsulates the pure, dark, status-seeking nature of the network. It involved an American man suffering from deep depression who's stranded in Kyrgyzstan. He was targeted by a 15-year-old girl linked to 764.
A teenager herself.
Which shows you that rapid victim-to-perpetrator pipeline. She and other members just dared him, goaded him into self-harm, and it escalated until he doused himself in gasoline and lit himself on fire, live on Discord.
And the reaction from the members watching wasn't horror.
It was celebration. It was a nihilistic spectacle. They were cheering, shouting out the names of their groups, laughing. The sources describe members competing for attention in the chat, proclaiming, "That's the worst death possible," while naming their own group. It was a digital gladiatorial match, where a man's death was just content for their online notoriety.
Then there's the devastating case of the pregnant teen who was lured from Roblox.
She was a minor who had been groomed and exploited. When she finally found the courage to threaten to report them, a member used the bricking tactic, hired someone to throw a brick through her car window, The shock of it was so intense it caused her to go into cardiac arrest.
And it killed her and her unborn child.
The person who did it was later arrested and charged specifically for operating as a service provider in the comm, charging between $50 and $200 for these services. It's not trafficking drugs or guns anymore. It's trafficking trauma and death.
We also have the case of Caleb Christopher Merritt, a CVLT member in Virginia.
This was an early high-profile case. In February 2021, he kidnapped and raped a 12-year-old girl. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to an astronomical 350 years in prison.
350 years.
That sentence was a clear signal that authorities understood this wasn't just cybercrime. It was a physical, predatory threat.
But maybe the clearest example of this youth-led murder for status is the case of a 17-year-old from Romania, Nino Luciano H., known as Tobbs.
Tobbs's case is the most direct link you can draw between the ideology and the act. He was trying to prove himself to a closely allied group, the Maniac Murder Cult. He first live-streamed himself attacking an 82-year-old man. Then 2 weeks later, he live-streamed the fatal stabbing of a 74-year-old woman, whom he believed to be Roma, on a 764 affiliated Discord server.
He committed a racially motivated murder just for clout, for acceptance into an online group. It's hard to imagine a pure distillation of this nihilistic violence.
It was entirely performative violence designed for his online peers. But what's almost as shocking as the crime is the judicial response, which shows you how hard it is to deal with this globally.
Tobbs, for that live-streamed, premeditated murder, was sentenced to only 14 years in prison.
14 years. You compare that to the 350 years Merritt got, or the 80 years Cadenhead got, and it's jarring. It raises serious questions about whether some international justice systems are equipped or even willing to treat this as the high-tier terrorist threat that the U.S. and Canada say it is.
But the global crackdowns in 2024 and 2025 show that some jurisdictions are catching up.
We have seen major arrests across multiple continents. In Germany, in 2025, authorities arrested a 20-year-old known as White Tiger, a leading figure linked to over 120 offenses, including murder and attempted murder.
And the most startling clot was uncovered in Brazil.
Yes, in May 2025, Brazilian police arrested a 764-aligned group that was actively planning to attack a Lady Gaga concert.
A Lady Gaga concert? With what?
With explosives, firearms, and Molotov cocktails. And crucially, authorities charged a third person in that plot with terrorism, because they were allegedly planning to perform a satanic human sacrifice of a child or a baby during the chaos.
That is the literal endpoint of this ideology, the 09A philosophy made real.
It's the lethal escalation when the occult transgression-based ideology merges with accelerationist plotting.
And the leadership itself is under constant attack. The DOJ recently announced the arrest of 2 more key figures.
Prasanda Paul, known as Trippy, age 20, was arrested in North Carolina. And Leonidas Varagianis, War, age 21, was caught in Greece. They are key leaders of a 764 subgroup and are now facing potential life imprisonment in the U.S.
And the effort to extradite Varagianis from Greece, that just underscores how seriously the U.S. is taking this. They're applying their terrorism laws to people operating anywhere in the world.
Which brings us to a key point. So many of these perpetrators, like the 15-year-old girl in the self-immolation case, are barely adults themselves.
They're both perpetrators and victims of the system's logic.
That is the tragic, self-perpetuating core of this network. The people committing the violence are frequently teens or young adults who were victims first, often with pre-existing mental health crises. They're coerced into extorting others, which essentially converts them into junior predators. It creates a buffer for the leadership and ensures the vicious nihilistic cycle just continues endlessly.
So even with the arrests of the founder, Cadenhead, who got an 80-year sentence, and all these other key figures, the sources are clear. 764 is still active.
Its resilience is a direct result of its decentralized structure. The moment Cadenhead was arrested, the network just splintered. It broke into dozens of smaller, autonomous subgroups, 676, Harm Nation, League Society, and so on. Collectively, they're just known as the COM.
The COM. So it's a generalized term for this whole ecosystem of online nihilistic crime.
It is. Law enforcement estimates the COM includes hundreds of core individuals actively doing the extortion and harassment, and thousands more involved in related cybercrime, like SIM swapping and doxing. There's no single central hub to take down. You ban one Discord server, they just make a new one. You arrest one leader, another one pops up. It's fluid.
Given that the DOJ classifies this as a Tier 1 threat, how are they adapting their legal strategy to fight this?
The main adaptation has been the aggressive use of terrorism laws. The sources show U.S. authorities are using these statutes against members both at home and, critically, abroad, like with the extradition of Varagianis from Greece. It moves the offense beyond standard exploitation and into a category that carries the most severe penalties and establishes global jurisdiction.
What about the platforms themselves? Discord, Roblox, Telegram, they're under intense pressure.
Immense scrutiny, and often outright criticism from law enforcement and politicians. The authorities argue that these platform operators are fundamentally responsible for taking more decisive action to protect minors. These platforms are the battleground, and they are struggling to keep up.
Can they even adapt, given how fast the comm moves?
They're trying. Roblox has restricted features for users under 17, they've implemented automated chat monitoring, and they're rolling out age verification with facial scanning. But Discord has a massive challenge. Its moderation relies mainly on user reports.
Which is too slow.
Way too slow. These guys use burner accounts, they get banned one day and are back with a new account the next. The platform's design, which prioritizes that rapid decentralized communication, is the very thing 764 exploits.
So even as law enforcement is breaking down the front door, the digital architecture lets the network rebuild the walls almost instantly. Before we wrap up, for any of our listeners who are concerned parents, educators, what immediate actionable resources do the sources point to?
This is probably the most important information we can share today. Everyone should know these. First, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. Their cyber tip line is the central place to report any online or offline child exploitation. If you see something, report it there.
Okay, NCMEC's cyber tip line. What else?
Second, for mental health and crisis support, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24/7. And finally, for victims of non-consensual image sharing, a core tactic of 764, there's a free service called Take It Down, also from NCMEC. It helps victims get that content removed from participating platforms.
This has been a truly dark deep dive. We've seen a threat that defies easy definition. It's this unprecedented convergence of sophisticated cybercrime, extreme nihilism, and youth-driven sadism. The 764 network is a form of modern-day terrorism, but it's not driven by a single doctrine. It's driven by a catastrophic desire just to cause destruction, using the most vulnerable people as both weapons and collateral damage.
And the constant theme through all the sources is the psychological function of it all. These young people are seeking status by orchestrating real-world violence and self-destruction in others. But to really grasp the depth of this crisis, you have to look at the psychological wreckage. There was a case of an arrested Canadian victim of 764 who, when they were interviewed, reported feeling loved by their abusers.
Loved.
They said they found serenity and comfort in the familiarity of the abuse.
That is just a devastating final thought. Serenity in the abuse itself.
It raises a profound question that I think we all have to reflect on. Is this generation struggling not just with the dangers of online predators, but with a fundamental collapse of human connection? A collapse that these extremist and sadistic groups are expertly exploiting. They offer a perverse, dark form of community and validation, a sense of belonging in a world that has otherwise abandoned them in exchange for absolute violent compliance.
That deep human need for community, weaponized by the worst impulses of this generation. With over 250 related FBI investigations in the U.S. alone and arrests still happening globally, this demands our immediate attention. The threat is global, the perpetrators are young, and the impact is generational. We urge you to keep educating yourself on digital safety, look up the resources we mentioned, and understand that protecting our communities is no longer just about passwords, it's about protecting our fundamental humanity.